All right, let's switch gears here a little bit and let's talk about potassium deficiency symptoms. And you can see the picture in the top right-hand corner, maybe, which is showing a potassium deficiency. And so how do you diagnose a potassium deficiency? So first of all, you should know that potassium is mobile in plants. And so what does that mean? That means that potassium is translocated from older leaves to newer leaves. And so where do we see a deficiency with respect to potassium? The deficiency symptoms appear first in the lower leaves. So this is key for diagnosing a potassium deficiency. Okay, you learned how to diagnose a nitrogen deficiency already, and nitrogen deficiencies occur first in older leaves because nitrogen is translocated from older to newer leaves. Potassium is shown as a deficiency in older leaves because potassium is also translocated from older to newer leaves when a plant perceives a potassium deficiency. However, they look completely different from one another, and you're going to see that in subsequent slides in this section of this unit. The potassium deficiency symptoms can progress toward the top leaves as potassium deficiency becomes more severe. The symptoms tend to vary by species, but they usually appear on leaf margins in older leaves. And this is different than nitrogen, right? If you remember, nitrogen deficiency in older leaves, at least in grass species, shows up first as sort of V-shaped chlorosis along the midrib of the leaf. And in places like, or in crops like soybean, the older leaves look completely washed out. Point number 4, and this is important for Ohio, that the deficiency can be triggered by dry soil conditions. And in early 2023, we had some dry soil conditions in the state of Ohio, and potassium deficiencies were showing up in our crops. And this should be a trigger. And this is the puzzle that you're learning in this class. You learned in Unit 2 that potassium is delivered to plant roots via diffusion, which occurs only over 1 to 2 centimeters in a growing season. And if the soil is dry and the plants are young and there's not a lot of roots that are exploring the soil itself, then you have the conditions that are correct for potassium deficiencies. The plants that we saw potassium deficiencies in early 2023 here in the state of Ohio actually grew out of that potassium deficiency as the rains finally came to the state. So point number 4 is really, really interesting and specific for the state of Ohio and this region of the United States. When deficiency symptoms are present, if you're talking about grass species like small grains like corn, wheat, rye, etc., you can have weakening of the straw, which leads to lodging or falling over of the plant. And of course, as we described in the last video, that when you have a potassium deficiency, you have an increased susceptibility to diseases and pests. So let me show you some pictures that illustrate some of these important points. So here is lodging in grass hay and in wheat. And this is simply due to these areas of this field having low potassium concentrations. And I know you can't see that it's low, but if you took a soil test, you would note that in these soils, in these regions within these fields, the potassium concentrations are considered low. And so there was susceptibility to lodging. Now, of course, every time you see plants that have fallen over in a field, you shouldn't think of potassium deficiency because it could be due to almost anything, right? An animal may have came through and laid down in this field, although this area, at least in the grass hay, looks too large to be an animal, unless it was an elephant. I doubt it was an elephant. Sometimes wind causes this, hail, etc. But if you don't have any of those that occur, or you don't live near elephants, then you might suspect potassium. Here's some deficiencies, okay? And so here's soybean. And so in the bottom right-hand corner in this field, this is potassium deficiency in soybean. And if you were to look at the plant leaves up close, this is what you would see in the bottom left-hand corner. And it's hard probably for you to tell that these are older leaves, but these are older leaves, and specifically the deficiency manifests itself along the leaf margins, right? You see chlorosis along the leaf margins, and when the deficiency is bad enough, the leaf margins become necrotic. Here is potassium deficiency in alfalfa, and you'll see these white splotches along the leaf margins. And this would be in an older leaf. Now, I know you can't see that this is an older leaf. You just have to trust me. But this is in an older leaf. And when you see splotching on margins of older leaves in alfalfa, you should think of potassium. Let me give you some other examples. Okay, so this is in cotton. The leaf in the center here has sufficient potassium. The leaves, at least this bottom left-hand corner leaf, is showing some pretty good potassium deficiencies along the leaf margins, right? And so in the inner part of the leaf, along the vein, you have green, and you have, well, this is severe. So this is necrotic. When potassium deficiencies are very severe, the entire leaf may turn necrotic. Let me show you some pictures here's corn in the top left-hand corner. The leaf on the bottom portion of this picture is healthy. And as you progress up, the potassium deficiency becomes worse and worse and worse. It starts along the leaf margins in older leaves. And as the deficiency progresses, the leaves turn necrotic. Top right-hand corner, this is sorghum. And again, you see the deficiency manifesting itself in older leaves along leaf margins. And then here in the bottom picture, I can't tell what this is. It doesn't look like corn to me, but regardless of what it is, you see deficiencies in older leaves, not the newer leaves, and it's along the leaf margins. So the deficiency shows up on older leaves. And what does this tell you about potassium mobility? We've already talked about this in the list I gave you, but it tells you that potassium is mobile, that when a plant is under potassium deficiency, potassium from the older leaves is translocated to the newer leaves. Here's deficiency in walnut. So the leaf on the right is fine. And as you move from right to left, the deficiency, as you see, manifests itself along the leaf margins. And it's either chlorotic or when it's severe, it's necrotic in terms of the leaf margins. Let me drive home a few more pictures here to drive home this point. So here's deficiency in wheat. And this looks like a greenhouse study without potassium. And you can see, it's hard to see that it's on the leaf margins, but it is really on the leaf margins in this wheat. Here's rice. The leaf tip, actually the leaf tip looks like it's burning over here in the wheat, but the leaf tip in the rice, you can definitely see that the leaf tip is burning, and the deficiency is sort of following the leaf margins. In fact, some of these leaves, you can see it follows the leaf margins. And the last picture I want to share with you is a picture from this plant that I've had for probably, oh my gosh, 20 years. It's a peace lily or just a lily, however you want to call it. And I've had it almost in the same soil the entire time. And I can tell you that I probably need to put this in either new soil or a bigger pot with new soil, or I simply need to add some potassium fertilizer to overcome the deficiency that I see each and every day. And here's the joke. I'm a soil scientist teaching you about soil science and fertility. And when I come home from work, I don't want to deal with potassium deficiency, so I let this plant suffer. It's really pathetic on my part, but it's true. It's suffered from potassium deficiencies for probably, I would say, 5 to 10 years. And I know how to overcome it, and I just haven't taken the steps to force this issue to go away.